Welcome to Chosen Conversations, where a group of friends talk about the Chosen series, what it means to them, and how it impacts their lives and proclaims the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. We're in season 2, episode 4, and today we'll be talking about the disciples, their dynamic, and more specifically about the dynamic between Simon Peter and Matthew. They've had a rough encounter from the very beginning in season 1. We'd seen their whole story through season 1 and season 2, and we'll just dive a little more into that story and discuss what has happened, where they've been, and where we're at, and how we can apply that to us today. So, John, Mark, why don't you go ahead and lead us with the story of these two disciples?
Thanks, David. That Chosen series begins with Matthew and Peter as main characters, along with Mary Magdalene. And these two characters share a common situation. You wouldn't think so, because Matthew is a tax collector working for the Romans. But we also see Peter trying to get out of debt. For whatever reason, he's in debt, and he's trying to find a way out, and he is willing to cooperate with Romans to find a way out. So we have Matthew working with the Romans and Peter cooperating with the Romans, though he reneges on that at the last minute. But both of them find themselves outside of their practicing faith community. In fact, when we have the Sabbath scenes in season 1, Matthew has his Sabbath with his dog, and Peter leaves his Sabbath to go to fish with the Romans in search of those who are violating the Sabbath. So both of them find themselves in cooperation with Roman occupation and Roman taxation, and they find themselves, neither one of them, practicing their faith in the way that it should be practiced.
Yeah, John Mark, you make me think about that scene too. That Peter has a little run-in with the Romans when they kind of think maybe he's trying to pull a fast one on us when he's fishing on Shabbat, and he gets in no uncertain terms. You either be successful with this, or we'll put you, under the jail. And Matthew is a witness of all of this. He's seeing this going on, and he knows, because he has access to the financial data of what Peter and apparently Andrew is looped into as well, the Roman government. And I found that very interesting, since that's one of those imaginative things the series does to maybe explain how they would have known each other, since Matthew is the tax collector in the town that Peter owes the tax in. But then the miraculous catch happens, and Matthew, being the casted character of extremely intelligent and very quick with the arithmetic, is sitting there saying the probability of this is 0. This cannot happen. And then the debt that is paid off by that miraculous catch, he has to tell Peter, who he thinks he kind of has in the crosshairs of being called on the carpet for his debt, that his debt's wiped out. And he really cannot process it. And I don't think that helps Haley with the animosity that is present between those two characters, because Peter already doesn't like the Roman government. Matthew's a representative of the Roman government, and now Peter's scot-free from what he owed the Roman government, and Matthew can't make sense.
Right. And they really got off to a bad start even before Matthew was called to be a disciple of Jesus. And what we see is that Jesus set up Matthew in situations to be curious and see him performing miracles, working in the lives of the other disciples, and led him to the moment of where he said, "Matthew, follow me." And Matthew dropped everything, dropped his job as being a tax collector, a very affluent job in the community. He was well off, as we know, and he left everything to follow Jesus. And even the moment that happened, we start seeing that animosity build, specifically with Peter. We see Peter as a very protective, very strong character. And we see him very protective of Jesus, and that's very understandable. And so what it shows us is we're going to continue to talk about that today, and how they didn't get along, how the disciples wondered and questioned, why did Jesus choose you as one of his disciples. Why are you worthy for this appointment or this role in Jesus's missionary journey? And so I'm excited for us to continue speaking about this. One thing that stands out to me that we can relate in our personal faith journey is, as Christians and followers of Jesus, we cannot control how God works and Jesus works in our life. We also cannot control who Jesus chooses to be a follower of him. We also don't understand the bigger picture. And so sometimes I think we can learn from this, and we can't judge each other. We don't understand what God's doing and working in our life. And the brothers and sisters you have around you in the congregation, you may not always get them or even like them to some extent, but the way that Jesus works is beyond our knowledge and understanding. And so I hope that as we see this series progress, we can see Matthew and Peter grow to get along better and find a way to get along and really work toward that mission. And I think we are starting to see that as we move through season.
I think when you were reminding us of the calling of Matthew and how Matthew felt unworthy about that. Who, me? You want me to follow you? And there was also that sense of unworthiness on the part of Peter when Jesus called him. He fell on his knees and said, get away from me, I'm a sinner. So both of them recognized the wonder of being called by Jesus, that this was a gracious call on the part of Jesus. And yet the animosity that Peter feels toward Matthew comes out in the calling of Matthew. Remember, we talked about that last season, where Peter says, you don't know who this man is. You don't know what he's done. I love the way Jesus looked at him, kind of like, are you really saying that to me? I mean, don't you know who you are? And Jesus said, well, Peter says, he's different. And Jesus says, get used to different. So that used to different, David, I wonder if you would comment on kind of when they were sitting around the fire in season 2 and the kind of discussion that was going on that Haley alluded to about they're trying to figure out what is Matthew doing here, and
it's
what's
kind
the
of
problem
sad
with Matthew
because
being there.
it's sad because I mean it seems like they all have it. They all have something against him, and it makes sense because he's the one that chose. He was born a Jew, and he chose to represent the other side. And so, at least among the others, they know, yeah, I know I'm not worthy, like Peter, or the others know no one's worthy to be part of the, but they were called to be in it. But they all have that sense that even though I'm not worthy, I never left my people. I never turned my back against them and went to the other side. And I think Matthew even himself has that guilt that he did do that. And he put himself above everything else, above his family, above his fellow, citizen neighbors. And that's why when you get to that part, even though they're all called now and part of that discipleship group, at that point, they still see him as an outsider. They still see him as a betrayer, that he left and went to the other side. And they can't happen to see through that. They can see through that and start building a relationship with him, because all they see is you're not for us, you're against us, and we just can't get past it. So it's kind of hard to see it, and obviously as we develop more, we'll see how that changes. But at that point in time, they're still stuck in that sense that he had turned his back against us, and we don't believe you yet. We don't know if you're still with us or against us, or why are you even here?
I think all of that's spot on, David. And you also made me think of something else I hadn't really considered before. It's almost like there's another level, too. All of that is correct, and they're sitting around the fire, and they're thinking about that. But that job that Matthew chose to do also made his affluence much higher than theirs. He has a house, and he has nicer clothes, and they right from the get-go they're picking at him about his shoes and how they throw him in that cart back in season 1, and he gets dirty, and he's going to throw his shoes away because he's got so many more pairs of shoes. They didn't live that way. They were much lower on the income scale, and I think they resented him for that too, as much as might, or almost as much as they might resent him for trading his people.
Yeah, I can see. There's a big economic difference that you're pointing out, Stan. There's a big political difference that you're pointing out, David. And then there is the kind of spectrum autism or that Matthew is on. He's different. He's a different sort of person, and all three of those things run against the grain of the other disciples: the economic, the political, and his disability. And we know we know that happens in our churches, doesn't it? That we're uncomfortable with that economic difference. We're uncomfortable with political differences. We're uncomfortable with people with disabilities. And we struggle to connect. We struggle to welcome. And it's really hard fittable to people who are different, especially those who are different that chose a different side on purpose, right? And I think we see kind of a real human struggle among the disciples to accept Matthew. But there are some who do accept him. Who would that be? Who's accepting and welcoming of Matthew among the disciples?
Well, we see Philip come in, and he, as a more mature disciple following John the Baptizer, John the Baptist as we know him, he knows more, he knows better. And as soon as he comes in, he realizes what's going on, and he decides to be different. And he decides to get to know Matthew and went to Matthew. And in that way, he is opening Matthew's doors to be part of the circle that he had been left out of. He's being welcomed back to the circle that he had been left out of, because Philip was the way into it, pretty much. Philip came in and he accepted him, and he decided to talk to him and make friendship and relationship with him. And so now we're seeing the others see Matthew a little differently because someone else came and decided to be different. So I think that's interesting to point out how sometimes we need an external person to come and show us differently so that we can see what we have been doing wrong and start acting different in situations that we didn't even see it before.
Well, brother, you've done it again. You just showed me another layer of something. I think that you're right with Philip. He brings wisdom, right? Because he's been following John the Baptist, and John has told him, "Oh, there's someone that's better. I'm not even worthy to untie their sandals." And so he sent them over to Jesus, right? So he's bringing the wisdom, I think you noted. But I think what John Mark was looking for is the women accept Matthew because there's no ego. So that's interesting. You've got wisdom coming from a follower of John to come over and say, guys, it is thinking differently. That it's not about who's worthy. Then you've got women who don't have the ego of trying to puff up their chest and prove who is the leader or whatever. And they're just saying, hey, why don't you learn Hebrew with us? Why don't you learn some of the scriptures with us? And they're embracing him in a different way than the other male disciples, I think, are.
Right. I wanted to add to what David said as well about the wisdom of having been a disciple of John. Remember, in the Gospel of Luke, this doesn't come out in the Chosen, but in the Gospel of Luke, John is baptizing tax collectors in Luke chapter 3. So Philip, if we follow that scenario, Philip is the sort of person who's been around tax collectors who have repented and become disciples of John. So it's not strange at all to him that a tax collector would be following Jesus.
Very good point. Haley, I wonder if you could tell us now about these differences, and Peter and Matthew are put together to go find Mary Magdalene when she has sort of a relapse into her previous life. And so that is fascinating that you take the male hothead ego person and the person who's already got an endearing connection to the women, and you send those two people to go try to find her.
Absolutely. If I may, I have one comment about Philip, and then we will get into that. So when you guys are speaking about Philip, really great knowledge and learning there about who Philip was and how he came into the picture. I just see Philip as an example for us as a mediator type personality, and the right perspective we need to have when approaching our group of believers and just having a mindset of acceptance. And I think the more we put ourselves around different types of people, the more we'll be comfortable in that, out of our comfort zone. So I think that's a great analogy there. Then with the women, I love what you guys said. I think this is why Jesus may have chosen women, or they chose to show women as followers of Jesus in this series, because they do bring a different perspective and different personality and different traits and talents to the picture that the men sometimes don't bring. That's the beauty and the difference in how God created us. And you do see the women nurturing Matthew, taking time to get to know him, caring for him, making him feel included. And I think that's why we see Matthew finding such love and friendship with Mary. And when Mary does face a very hard time, Matthew's very concerned. And Jesus does prepare both Peter and Matthew to go search for Mary. And as you see in the many disciples question, why in the world would Jesus pick Peter and Matthew to go look for Mary? I think they even said, I hope they don't kill each other, fun, joking comments like that. But honestly, it's apples and oranges in their personalities. And so when I was watching the episode where they go look for Mary, as soon as she leaves, Jesus is like, go get her immediately, because she's so important to the ministry. They care so much about her. She's had such large struggles, and she's a human that has dealt with a lot, and she's a broken person. And so we see that, you can never be too far gone for Jesus to come searching and rescuing you. But in this scene, we see Peter, who I see him as strong, protective, a very good leader, very bold. And then we see Matthew as compassionate, caring, more loving and nurturing. And so you can see them two together may clash, but I truly believe wanted them to go together, to help each other, to see that they both can contribute to the better good and the goal behind bringing Mary back. And I think we see in these episodes the connection between Matthew and Peter, and how Matthew came and nurtured Mary. In that scene, we see when Mary was actually throwing up because she was sick from being at the brothel, we see Peter kind of look at Matthew with some eyes of compassion, look at Matthew a little differently in that moment. And we see him maybe thinking, Matthew does have something to bring to the table here. Maybe there's a reason that Matthew came with me on this journey. So I think characteristics like that, two opposite characteristics, can really be good for the mission. And we can see through this that just because one person is different than you might both have some unique talents to bring to the picture. So I love that scene in The Chosen, and I can definitely understand why Jesus chose the two disciples, Peter and Matthew, to go together to get Mary.
Wow, that's a great point, Haley. When I was thinking about that ministry aspect of it, when two people who have differences, different personalities, different backgrounds, but when they cooperate together to help someone, when they cooperate together to do ministry, they can come together in a unity and come together in a mutuality that they might not have had or had the capacity for before. So it becomes a transformative. Ministry is transformative. When we minister together, we as a community, as people in relationship, we not only are helping the object or the subject of the ministry is, but we're being transformed ourselves in the process of ministering to other people. Mm-hmm. And that reminds me of going back to around the campfire. And maybe we can conclude with this. When the hostility toward Matthew and the questioning of Matthew and gets to a crescendo, and the disciples are about to come to blows almost, that's when Jesus walks by, and he's dead, tired. He's shuffling he's bent over. You can tell he is so fatigued. He goes straight to his tent. He doesn't greet the disciples in any significant way. Goes straight to his tent. And Mary gets up. Mary, his mother, gets up to go wash his feet. And then the disciples say, oh yeah, it's not about us. It's about Jesus, and it's about what he has called us into. And may we embrace that in our own lives. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with us all. Amen.